The girl joyfully called out to Shizuru-sama as a tiny creature flew past, and the blonde man in front turned with a smile and beckoned everyone to follow him. The group then moved forward along the rocky road, filled with a gentle breeze. Meanwhile, the cheerful young man with the gift of lightning confidently extended his hand, and two intent companions watched him with interest, while another figure stood to the side, his back turned. The air was thick with tension, as if the elements themselves were awaiting his command. In the pouring rain, a man, soaking wet after a long shift, grumbled at his fate and recalled the last time he heard thunder on a night like this. The crowd rushed past, but he stubbornly made his way forward along the wet asphalt. After work, the guy stopped at a bookstore, bought his favorite novel, and dreamed of a hot dinner and a bath. However, on his way home, he suddenly noticed a strange light in the distance and couldn't help but chuckle, sensing the approach of something unusual. At that very moment, a powerful bolt of lightning split the sky, illuminating the city's towers. This was the moment the narrator was struck by the lightning, standing in the middle of the street between the shining skyscrapers. Coming to his senses, the young man in the suit looked around in confusion, unsure if he had found himself in the underworld. Then a stern middle-aged man approached him and unexpectedly apologized, further embarrassing him. The stranger then calmly explained that he'd accidentally fired a bolt of lightning into the alien world to relieve stress, and apparently hit him. Shizuru didn't know how to react, feeling that it all sounded insane. However, the man admitted that the blame lay with him and offered compensation, rebirth in another world. And although the offers sounded incredible, there was genuine confidence in the deity's voice. Shizuru approached the Thunder Lord cautiously, asking if he was joking. The god merely chuckled and asked if he was opposed, to which the boy, after some hesitation, admitted that he found the idea difficult to accept. But soon a glimmer of curiosity flickered in his eyes. What if this new world turned out to be full of swords, magic, and the adventures he'd read about? Then the Thunderer nodded approvingly and added that he could grant the blessing right then and there. Afterwards, the god apologized for his excessive haste and handed Shizuru a thick book detailing the new world. He took it carefully, feeling reality slipping from beneath his feet. The book opened of its own accord, and the pages glowed with a soft light, as if inviting a journey. Streams of energy began to swirl around, preparing the way for a new birth. At this point, the story told of a young man destined to become the greatest mage. He will travel across lands, seek allies, defeat enemies, and one day become a hero the whole world will trust. Previously, Shizuru often avoided trouble by trying to get along with his colleagues, but he still felt trapped in the daily grind. Deep down, he dreamed of becoming someone who would one day change his destiny, a true hero. Then the elder god nodded in agreement, and a blinding flash illuminated Shizuru's body. He was transported to another reality, and a warm voice sounded behind him, wishing him luck on his new path. After this, the elder god wondered if he had been too quick to believe the story of reincarnation. He became uneasy. After all, who knows what a person might become if accidentally struck by lightning? He took a sip from his cup and quietly declared that fate could not be avoided. Then he looked toward the distant glow and asked Shizuru to fulfill his hopes. Meanwhile, the young man woke up in a new body, small, childlike, with tiny hands. He looked around and realized he was in another world, and a woman stood next to him with a warm smile, greeting him as if he were family. The boy happily thought he was lucky. Her gentle hands, kind voice, and soft gaze seemed the embodiment of love. A conviction grew in his heart that this beautiful woman was his real mother. Then she solemnly declared that the child would receive the blessing of fire as the heir to the Ferblaze family. He held his breath, hoping that the family was good, while the woman prayed to the spirit of flame for the gift of strength and destiny. The child cried out, complaining that the flames were burning his skin, but the older figure gently held him back, asking him not to be afraid. Then, with a slight smile, the voice asked if he was glad to receive the blessing of the family fire, reminding him that it was a sign of strength and lineage. After this, the man with long white hair smiled calmly and offered to continue the ceremony, carefully embracing the trembling baby. He hesitated, surrounded by a light smoke that melted, as if dissolving in the flame's light. Meanwhile, the boy, with tears in his eyes, mentally cried out to the thunder god for help, recalling the fear of a possible death at the hands of his mother after his rebirth. He swore to himself that he would not become a hero if it meant suffering again. At that moment, the woman holding the child noticed a strange movement in the distance, and a soldier standing nearby sharply shouted at Irina to run. A huge dragon appeared over the horizon, causing everyone to freeze in horror. Panic gripped the crowd as the monster approached. Some exclaimed that it was impossible, while others nervously whispered that such a creature shouldn't exist among mere mortals. The frightened child clutched his mother's dress, but she, remaining calm, quietly said that Gren would defeat the enormous dragon. Her confidence and kind voice seemed to drive away some of the fear from the boy's heart. He realized she was frightened herself, but she didn't show it, only to protect him. The warmth of her hands and the calm in her eyes helped him feel trust and quiet gratitude. Then the sky burst into a flash of light. The dragon himself appeared before them, majestic and menacing. The narrator noted that he had met his mother, whose name he didn't even know, but he was already ready to protect her. The boy gathered his courage and concentrated, and a huge magic circle began to glow above him. The dragon watched the flashes of power warily, preparing for battle. The enormous monster radiated power, but the young hero felt he must now become stronger to protect all those dear to him. Then, as if a whisper of a great god's blessing was heard above him, ushering in new trials. After the battle, someone was floating in the dark, shattered space, slowly closing their eyes, while another was worried about Shizuru-sama's safety, wondering how he could sleep even in such a situation. That day, the dark dragon Dixeria, an ancient threat to the kingdom of Astraea, was destroyed. Amidst the chaos, someone called out to Irina-sama, who lay on the ground, asking her not to leave. Later investigation confirmed that the boy who slew the dragon was called the Miracle Child. The story presented him as Shizuru, a baby sleeping peacefully among flowers. Several years later, a scream rang out, waking Shizuru at the gates of a huge mansion. Still yawning, he begged for 5 more minutes of sleep before getting up slowly. However, the girl with the long ponytail tried to wake him by poking him in the eyes. Shizuru cried out in pain, sitting up abruptly in bed, and she only laughed. The cheerful maid greeted her 7-year-old master, remarking that the morning had been wonderful. He replied with a touch of modesty that cheerfulness was the only thing he could boast of. The girl told him to change, as he had a busy day ahead. He yawned and agreed, taking off his shirt as she reminded him of his schedule. Then Shizuru sighed and said he could handle the clothes himself. The girl named Marl, his personal maid, looked down and, slightly upset, left the room. Left alone, he warmly remembered how, since childhood, Marl had always been there, older in age, but in character more like a younger sister, on whom he could rely. 7 days had passed since his reincarnation, and now he lived as Shizuru, the second son of the Ferblaze family, in a world where magic and fire determined everyone's fate. The golden-haired girl couldn't help but admire the thunder deity's noble features, feeling grateful for the opportunity to see him again. Meanwhile, the man inquired about how he was coping since their last meeting, trying to detect any change in his interlocutor's mood. After a short pause, he apologized for the wait and offered to go to the dining room, but the maid insisted that next time she wanted to help him change. The young man then abruptly refused, explaining that he wouldn't allow an underage maid to do such a thing. The girl respectfully noted that Shizuru-sama was serious, but not like other aristocrats. In response, the boy, with a slight smile, said he would like to dine with the entire staff someday, recalling their recent meal. He awkwardly apologized for always eating alone in the spacious room and explained that after 30 years of living as a commoner, he found it difficult to adapt to the manners of the nobility. He found it easiest to remain himself. Then the maid informed him that Gren-sama wished to speak with her master and advised him to stop by later. The young man was surprised, as he usually warned of such meetings in advance, which struck him as suspicious. After this, he excitedly suggested that perhaps he would be allowed to study magic. The bespectacled man, with an approving smile, confirmed that this was entirely possible, since he aspired to become the greatest wizard. The girl wished him luck with a timid smile, but the other boy warned that magic was dangerous and took time. However, he emphasized that Shizuru's very existence was already something exceptional. The young heir explained that in the kingdom of Astraea, spiritual forces randomly assign infants one of the 6 elements when they turn 6 months old. However, in reality, children inherit their parents' magic. The girl said that her father, brother, and almost the entire Ferblaze family possess light magic, but she is the only one who did not receive this gift, feeling strange among them. Then the young man became thoughtful, realizing he had become the first wielder of thunder magic, a rare power that had aroused the interest of the entire kingdom. However, no one knew who could teach such an unusual art. He soon explained that the lady he had mentioned was not his mother at all, to which his interlocutor became embarrassed and blushed slightly, not expecting such a clarification. The boy then confessed that he was being pressured to grow up quickly and acquire his own estate. He reflected on his tutor's strictness, considering himself an insufficiently worthy heir to the family line, forced to constantly study. The girl with short red hair confirmed the rumors that servants were punished for the slightest mistakes. At that moment, the blonde man remembered that Merly also feared his mistress and felt worried for Shizuru-sama. The girl gasped when she learned of the magnitude of his power. Merly quickly apologized, realizing she had underestimated Shizuru's abilities in defeating the monstrous dragon, dubbed a disaster. Then he remembered an incident from his infancy, when an angry dragon had suddenly appeared, and a power had flared in his palm, destroying the beast. Now he began to suspect that it had not been a coincidence. After these reminiscing, the boy, cheerfully asking what was for lunch today, saw him, and the uniformed maid let out a surprised cry, greeting Shizuru-sama as he entered the dining room. The young man was surprised to see his mother, who, in a good mood, said she had ordered the maids to bring her here. She noted that he looked especially healthy and cheerful today. The woman happily called the day a success, as they had met so unexpectedly. The boy, however, sadly recalled that she had once lost her sight and the ability to move after the very lightning that had defeated the dragon. A gentle hand touched his cheek, and her voice trembled with emotion. She said he had grown so much, and the moment was filled with quiet tenderness and gratitude for the years that had passed. The woman then ran her fingers over his face and smiled, noting how much he'd changed in just 3 days. Confused, Shizuru muttered that it was probably just age and growing up. The woman gently remarked that Shizuru looked tense, and the girl standing next to him mischievously teased him for acting like a child in front of Lady Irina. Then, muffled laughter erupted around the table, and the atmosphere warmed slightly. After this, the hostess, smiling, asked her young gentleman to accompany her to dinner. The boy, rising, thought that his mother seemed to sense his inner doubts and insecurities, marveling at her insight. He later recalled that his mother spent her days indoors, avoiding sunlight. Despite her calm words and friendly manner, she looked tired and pale, which worried him. Meanwhile, Shizuru realized how attached he had become to her over the past 7 years. He dreamed of healing his mother and one day seeing her walk the sun again with clear, shining eyes. The next day, the boy walked along a forest path, reflecting on how, in the old world, children quickly memorized many things. He considered it a waste of time to sit idle during these golden years, looking around and noticing that no one was around. He suddenly perked up, knowing he'd soon be 12, the age he was allowed to enroll in a magic school. Sparks of mana sparkled around him, and he silently begged the spirits to favor his efforts. The boy recalled that as an infant, he couldn't control the spirits, but he sensed their presence. He then realized that if he shared his magical power with them and treated them with respect, they would respond with kindness and support. Since birth, he'd been trying to use magic to the point of exhaustion, constantly testing the limits of his abilities. Now, he decided it was better to learn on his own, even if it was dangerous. He then wondered if he could cast a body-strengthening spell, and, concentrating, began to chant the words, feeling a huge reserve of power awakening within him. Inspired, he picked up the new item and joked with a smile that it was the legendary lightning sword. After a pause, he laughed, admitting it was just a joke, and surprised gasps came from behind him. Then he gazed with delight at the unusual weapons and, with childish interest, showed off one gleaming blade after another. Each new example seemed more perfect to him than the last. He considered the time it would take him to learn to transform weapons as quickly as the manga heroes. However, the thought of failure troubled him, making him doubt his own abilities. Shizuru admitted that the body enhancement technique was useful, but short-lived. Even a second's hesitation in combat could cost him his life, so he must master all types of weapons. Later, he lay down on the grass, feeling tired but not giving up. Thoughts of future training and secret experiments filled him with determination not to stop. He hid in the thick grass, afraid that if he was accidentally spotted, especially by his second mother, there would be a ruckus. Then he might even be sent to the border, which forced him to be more cautious. Suddenly he remembered his father calling him earlier. Quickly getting up, Shizuru brushed off his clothes and headed toward the distant building, lost behind the trees. As he approached, he heard someone address his father. His father immediately recognized the newcomer as his son and, with commanding calm, invited him in, nodding slightly in greeting. Glenn Furblaze stood before him, a confident warrior, a skilled swordsman, and a fire mage who had earned fame in the battle against the last demon lord. His name was spoken with respect throughout the kingdom. The older man kindly invited his son to sit down and asked how things were going. The young man replied that everything was the same, unchanged, trying to speak calmly. Then the short-haired warrior chuckled and reminded him of how he'd stolen a book from the knights at the age of 7. The blonde sheepishly admitted that, even though 2 years had passed, he was still the same clumsy student in that regard. The red-haired man smiled and remarked on his interlocutor's brash nature, calling it a typical manifestation of youthful rebellion. The blonde man then confidently declared that he was much more serious than his father, who had secretly joined a band of adventurers without consulting his family. Garrett asked with a slight grin if he wanted to hear stories of his glory days, but the young man objected that the head of the Furblaze family should be busy managing the ancestral lands, and not fighting on the front lines. In the spacious hall, the man confidently explained the reason for the meeting, noting that their directness helped maintain a strong relationship. The young heir thought at the time that their bond was more reminiscent of friendship than that of father and son. Shizuru was surprised when his father called his behavior childish and wondered if this was the first time his father had addressed him directly. He even suspected he'd been summoned here for a scolding, but he didn't yet understand why. The man then raised his voice and sharply reprimanded his son, saying that anyone who only flattered others didn't deserve permission. He demanded that he prove his strength through actions, not words. The angry young man asked if it was normal for a child to attack his parents, but the other, remaining calm, merely lazily replied that it happened. At that moment, the third participant in the scene irritably noticed that he had activated magic. The red-haired man asked if the younger brother really wanted to settle the matter by fighting, but he declined, claiming he was afraid of his mother's wrath. Then the man reassured him and added that he hadn't come to scold him, but to share good news. Shizuru asked in surprise what had happened and was reminded that he was almost 8, meaning it was time to take up family responsibilities. He guessed the conversation was probably about his birthday or the magical trials. The inspired boy promised to carry out any orders, earning praise as a true heir to the Furblazes. Then, with a satisfied grin, his father announced that, starting tomorrow, he would be in charge of the territory. However, the man reproachfully noted that the boy's father was neglecting his duties. Shizuru then declared that he would take matters into his own hands, using only his thunder magic, but was told that he should have let his elder brother deal with the consequences himself. The young heir offered to reveal the latest news to a girl from the tavern with a sweet voice, which confused his interlocutor, who did not understand how he knew such details. Shizuru then explained that, with the help of spirits, he had succeeded in replacing radio waves, creating images and sounds, similar to television or telephones. Thus, he had accidentally invented tracking magic, calling it lightning search. He sat in a chair, tired of clutching his head, explaining that he could only track those nearby. Having cast the spell on Glenn, he'd understood more than he'd intended, but now he didn't know how to stop it without disturbing his father's peace. The father, leaning back in his chair, joked that he was just trying to tease his son a little. The young man, surprised, asked if he really intended to let him use magic. The guy confidently promised to keep his word and take responsibility, but the man, narrowing his eyes, asked if he could convince their mother, since it was she who was causing the greatest concern. Shizuru, beaming with joy, explained that he could finally master magic properly and that a bride had already been chosen for him. The other participant in the conversation thoughtfully tried to feign surprise, while simultaneously worrying about the reaction of his stern companion. The boy quietly apologized to his father, admitting he was a little confused. His father, slapping his hand on the table, enthusiastically declared that such changes were excellent news. After this, the man reminded that tomorrow there would be a meeting with another noble family, and advised to prepare carefully, because it would be an important day. The next morning, the maid gently woke Shizuru, reminding him of the many tasks ahead. Still tired from the previous day's magical duel with Glenn, he thought his father always made decisions alone. Later, the man explained that his bride was the second daughter of the famous Lorelei family. Yawning, the boy thought he had already expected this outcome, since he was the second son of a Marquis family, and his fate had long been sealed. Shizuru wondered if she really was the second daughter of the Lorelei family and the same age as him. Someone nearby remarked that the girl was not only beautiful but also kind-hearted. The young man then confirmed that she was nicknamed the Lady Without Blessing. The narrator explained that despite her noble origin, the girl lacked any magical blessing, which was considered a shame and a source of ridicule for her family. Shizuru noted that her case was as rare as his own lightning magic. However, he was warned not to mention the girl's nickname to her or her father, who they called a fool. After this, the young man suddenly wondered whether his future children would inherit the power of thunder. He recalled his father's political intrigues, taking concubines with various magical gifts to maintain balance in the family. This thought struck Shizuru as repulsive, like a scene from a cheap drama, where feelings are replaced by calculation. Meanwhile, Raiden scowled at her efforts, and Tiara, with a sincere smile, said she was happy her father had praised her. But someone's harsh, hateful voice threatened that she wouldn't live to see the morning. The girl enthusiastically praised the young man, who was amazed that this was his first magical duel. He examined his new, sparkling costume and anxiously wondered if everyone had known about his performance in advance. The boy, with slight trepidation, hoped that his bride would be kind and not arrogant. His cheerful friend, however, began to smirk at her beauty, teasing him that he apparently didn't yet know how to treat a girl. She then offered to lend him some romance books, but Shizuru declined, noting that Merle's works were more about love between young men. She countered that she also had regular novels, and he reflected on the complexity of human emotions. His friend gently reassured him, telling him that Shizuru-sama was very attractive and that any girl would definitely fall in love with him. Hearing this, he felt for the first time a sense of confidence and interest in life that he had previously lacked. Soon the confident man greeted Magnus warmly, who responded with a restrained thank you, while Shizuru stood nearby, silently watching their exchange of pleasantries. The man introduced his daughter by extending his hand to her and inviting her to come closer, making it clear that it was time for a formal introduction. Lucina bowed politely and greeted Shizuru, who blushed and looked taken aback. He then quickly composed himself and, introducing himself as Shizuru for Blaze, returned her warm bow. The girl expressed gratitude for the engagement, despite her circumstances, adding that she had heard a lot about him. One of the men praised her fortitude, and another proudly called Lucina his pride, recalling rumors of Shizuru's genius. The young heir looked at his father in surprise, not believing his words. He laughed and confidently declared that his opponents were overestimating themselves, as the enemy was truly cunning and had once attacked him without warning. Shizuru, with a forced smile, wondered if they were currently testing him for suitability for marriage, and the man in glasses watched intently, expressing a keen interest in what was happening. Soon, the confident gentleman suggested that they discuss something in person, inviting them to go for a walk. The young man was at a loss for words, and the girl standing nearby remained silent, watching his reaction. Later, it was confirmed that Lucina would be staying abroad to study for 3 months. Then, with a gentle smile, she asked to be called by her first name, and Shizuru responded by inviting them to simply call him Shizuru. But the girl calmly explained that their union was not entirely conventional and she could not accept such liberties. Only Shizuru-dano's blessing would allow her to dream of a real marriage, which surprised the young man. She then quietly said that she was sincerely glad of this engagement and would not become a burden on the way to his future glory, demonstrating rare dignity. In conclusion, the girl promised to support Shizuru as the ideal bride and asked him to treat her as the ideal lover. He, looking at her closely, wondered if she had spoken these words only at the behest of those around her. The girl stood there, her eyes shining with tears, while the boy sincerely insisted he was speaking from the heart. His words were simple, but they were filled with genuine warmth. Afterwards, they agreed to leave together. The young man promised he would definitely make her smile, to which she, with a slight tremor, softly agreed. Then he turned and calmly advised her to prepare for the day ahead. Meanwhile, a confident girl with a high ponytail approached Lucina and cheerfully declared that she should get ready, because she intended to make her smile. Meanwhile, another girl, hiding behind a tree, realized she was being watched. A woman standing nearby cheerfully praised Shizuru for growing up, while a young man standing nearby sheepishly noted that she had said that before. The girl, her eyes sparkling, exclaimed that she'd heard of Lucina Dano's charms and asked if he'd fallen in love at first sight. The boy instantly blushed and hastily denied it, while the maid, watching nearby, merely smiled softly. The young gentleman sheepishly admitted he'd let it slip by accident, but the maid gently assured him he'd handled it well. She advised him to be more assertive in his conversation, after which he firmly resolved to get closer to Lucina. Later, the girl calmly said that she wasn't picky about food and could eat anything, so there was no need to worry. However, deep down, she wondered if it would be difficult for her to be away from home. Bowing politely, she declined the invitation to go along, explaining that she might cause inconvenience and asking to be allowed to stay. After a while, the girl called out anxiously to the fallen young man, and he asked painfully if she hated him. Then another man calmly remarked that she was merely observing etiquette and harbored no hatred. After this, the guy paused for thought, and his interlocutor suggested that Lucina was simply used to keeping everything to herself because her life had been difficult. He nodded, agreeing with this conclusion. Shizuru recalled Lucina's caution and her troubled childhood. He wondered if the adults, including her father, Marquis Lorelei, had truly treated her with care. Later, the young man, unable to protect the girl, unconsciously released a burst of magic out of frustration. A woman named Shizuru approached him, gently reassuring him and calling him Marl. Then she advised him not to worry about his 8th birthday and not to rush things, since he was just starting to get to know her. The boy was surprised, but still agreed. Someone mentioned in conversation that the girl would likely be nervous at the party and might like sweets. A short, curious was the response, and the topic quickly changed. The girl enthusiastically encouraged the hesitant young man, offering him support and even her books. Afterward, she decisively declared that she was getting back to work, preparing for action. That same day, the man ceremoniously welcomed guests to Shizuru's birthday party, explaining that it was a buffet open to everyone, including servants. He wished everyone a good time and left briefly. One of the guests politely asked the young host if he was pleased with the modest celebration. Shizuru answered affirmatively, explaining that a large gathering would only frighten Lucina. However, another man angrily declared that such distinguished guests deserved a lavish reception. A third member hastened to point out that the Ferblaze family was all too well known for its difficulties, after which the first reluctantly apologized. At the feast, Shizuru observed how even the servants were enjoying the food at the tables without any inhibitions. He was pleased to realize that keeping the party casual had been the right decision. Soon he approached the head chef, addressing him respectfully. The chef apologized for the long break and asked with interest what the guests thought of the food, as this was his first meal in a long time. The bespectacled man served the food to the surprised girl, and one of the guests remarked that the timing was perfect. Then the other two glanced at each other in relief, admiring how well the presentation had turned out. The girl admitted that she sometimes missed the dishes from her former world. The older man praised the head chef's talent and noted that the menu had been personally compiled by Master Shizuru, which explained the delicacy of the dishes. After this, the young man invited Lucina to have dessert on the balcony, and the one with glasses gently advised her to accept the invitation, emphasizing that it came from the host himself. The young man confidently said that he would not allow such an honored guest to stand, and the girl, embarrassed, admitted that she had never seen such dishes before and did not expect such luxury. The cheerful young man smiled with relief, and his dark-haired companion confidently confirmed that the dessert was delicious. Then the camera zoomed in on Lucina, who was gazing with a blush at the selection of mouth-watering sweets. The boy offered her some cookies he'd helped bake. The girl hesitated, afraid of breaking etiquette under the gaze of the guests, but he quietly assured her that no one was watching and gently encouraged her to try them. She carefully took a bite and, savoring the delicate flavor, smiled. Nearby, another girl ate with determination, and a boy excitedly asked what another delicacy tasted like, eagerly awaiting an answer. The girl happily tasted the pudding, and the young man explained its name and offered another spoonful, noticing the sparkle of interest in her gaze. Nearby, two maids silently observed this quiet, almost romantic scene. She thanked him for the sweets, and he, smiling, ate them with relish, puzzled by her awkwardness. She admitted that the desserts were delicious, but it was a little embarrassing to eat them in front of everyone, to which he responded with a warm, satisfied smile. The girl felt guilty about having fun on Shizuru's birthday, but he quickly assured her he was enjoying the moment too. He apologized and looked at her with genuine concern, and a comfortable silence fell between them. She suddenly smiled and said she was genuinely having fun. The young man was surprised and asked if she'd really just said that, as if he couldn't believe his own ears. Elsewhere, a maid noted with concern that Lady Lucina looked tired. She added that Master Shizuru had tried so hard to get closer to her, and now it was a shame she was leaving soon. One of the men explained that the Four Blazes holdings were located between the lands of Lorelei and Liffey's and served as a transit point. He added regretfully that there was nothing that could be done in the current situation. The girl, standing by the window, clutched the edge of the curtain and quietly admitted she was sad. Then the guy assured her they would see each other again soon, as she had promised to come as soon as she returned. The young man thought that after her birthday, Lucina had become a little more open. But she, though she seemed upset, told him not to dwell on it. Then his friend, smiling, teased him that he was already too strong. The young man noticed that his master now looked happier. The girl agreed and admitted that she no longer needed to secretly practice magic, although someone seemed to already know about this secret. The boy happily explained that, thanks to his father's insistence, he was now officially allowed to use magic and train in the enchanted forest under guard. Pleased, his father ordered him to follow him. One maid turned away with a smirk, and another asked if Marl was angry. She replied calmly that she wasn't, but was nonetheless irritated that Master Shizuru was ignoring her advice. The young man apologized sincerely, explaining that he couldn't get angry, but was always worried about her. Then the girl gently reassured him that if it was Master Shizuru, everything would definitely end well. The boy confidently declared that the spirits were kind and that his 8th level magic training would proceed smoothly. But suddenly his expression changed, surprise and annoyance mingled, and the maid quietly remarked that he seemed to have provoked his opponents. The girl silently pondered the upcoming plan, and the young man anxiously admitted that it was all too risky. He wondered what would happen if she learned of his secret 8-year magical training, but the maid sternly insisted, no dangerous undertakings. Soon, the boy excitedly remarked that nothing compares to practicing in the open. However, his companion suddenly stopped and asked if Marl had forgotten anything important. Then one of the young men cheerfully called out to Shizuru. He turned around abruptly and, recognizing the voice, announced in surprise that it was his older brother standing before him. Before them stood Hamura Furblaze, the first son of the Furblaze family and heir to the title of Count, who usually resided in the dormitory of the Magic Academy. One of the young men jokingly asked him why he kept saying "arg" while looking at him, and wondered if he was resting. The other one sharply replied that he hadn't come to rest, but had heard disturbing rumors about Shizuru. The red-haired boy excitedly declared that he wanted to go to the enchanted forest together. The blonde boy looked a little wary, but still listened attentively to his brother. The brothers began discussing the possibility of extending their summer vacation, but the elder one recalled how the younger one had once been left as bait when they secretly escaped from the estate. The conversation quickly descended into a cheerful squabble. In response, the younger one mockingly said that he himself should be caught, because his self-confidence was exactly like their father's. He noted that it was precisely this straightforwardness that allowed them to remain close, despite their different backgrounds and mothers. In the end, he admitted that it seemed there was no other way. The boy happily agreed to the proposal, provided his stepmother gave his permission. He then called out to Shizuru, who looked at him in surprise, while the man standing next to him thoughtfully noted that his stepmother's decision would be decisive. The cheerful young man suggested simply running away, as if it were a children's outing. The other one was surprised at how someone could talk about it so calmly, as if it were harmless fun. Then the boy realized that his mother wouldn't let him go anyway, as she kept talking about the inheritance and studying at the academy. Therefore, in his opinion, the only way out was to try to sneak out. He asked if his interlocutor was surprised by his strengthening of his body, to which he replied that he was simply not used to such forays, and asked why he was even starting all this. The younger brother suddenly realized that his elder brother was also using body reinforcement, and he felt irritated. After all, he was 5 years older and larger, yet he couldn't land a single attack. He complained angrily about his own inexperience. He admitted that he had no chance of winning now, but the elder just laughed and offered to join, asking if he had an escape plan. Then the younger one confidently suggested knocking out the guards and escaping, but the other one warned that they would be caught in a couple of minutes and called this plan a stupid fantasy. After a brief pause, the boy came up with a new idea, a secret expedition where they could deny everything if caught. His interlocutor raised an eyebrow, amazed at his resourcefulness. Ultimately, the younger one suggested meeting at the entrance to the forest and going there separately to avoid suspicion. The older one nodded approvingly, promising to go first and be careful. Sometime later, the young man was lying on the sofa, reading a book and sipping tea, when he suddenly heard his brother's loud voice and the door slam. Someone nearby mockingly remarked that he'd been caught surprisingly quickly. Then the younger brother calmly explained to the older brother that he saw no point in taking risks now, as one mistake could cost them their right to leave the house. He sincerely apologized and admitted that it was better to wait for official permission. The squad warned Shizuru not to venture too deep into the magic forest on his first day of practice. However, the young man was eagerly awaiting the start of field training when he suddenly heard a familiar voice mockingly calling him slow. Soon, a tense group surrounded the confused young man, demanding to know what his plans were with Mr. Hamura. He panicked and assured everyone that he knew nothing and had nothing to do with what was happening. Then one of the young men cheerfully admitted that he'd run away that morning, even though he'd already been caught yesterday. Another apologized for causing constant trouble, and the guys standing nearby shouted at their older brother to stop talking nonsense. Shizuru considered that perhaps the situation wasn't a disaster, but a chance to prove himself. At that moment, he noticed his older brother was about to leave with him, and everyone present approvingly decided to go as a group. The eldest brother addressed his comrades, declaring that he, the family heir, needed to be protected first and foremost. These words stunned the others, and puzzled questions immediately followed. The boy happily confirmed this and called him Big Brother, while the other participant abruptly declared that the owner was definitely not involved. Meanwhile, the two began arguing, and one of them suddenly disappeared from view. The young man explained that he usually traveled only with guards, but thanks to his brother, he had managed to escape without incident. At that moment, he sensed a faint magical presence nearby. He nimbly climbed a tree, using lightning magic to survey the surroundings from above, noting how convenient it was to assess the situation. Someone nearby was watching him from the shadows. The boy sensed the monsters approaching and was surprised to realize that his brother seemed to have already caught up with him. However, his mind told him that was impossible, and he became wary. A creature with yellow skin and sharp claws emerged from the undergrowth before him. Shizuru instantly realized he was looking at a goblin, a true monster, preparing to attack. His gaze grew cold and focused, piercing with killing intent. This was no mock battle, but a deadly encounter where a mistake could cost lives. The young mage was eagerly considering which weapon to choose, but at that moment the creature lunged at him with a snarl. For the first time, he felt a real threat and realized that this was for real. Focusing, the fighter noted that surprise interfered with thinking in combat. He concluded, analyze less, act more, and prepared to attack again. Looking around, he realized that he was surrounded by 20 goblins, but despite his fear, he kept his cool and began to think about his next move. At that moment, a noise was heard from the side. His comrades rushed towards the sound and found Shizuru lying on the ground with blood on his face, fearfully checking to see if he was injured. However, the young man smiled calmly and said everything was fine, explaining that the blood wasn't his. He looked tired, but his confidence inspired reassurance. Surveying the battlefield, they saw dozens of goblin corpses. Someone asked if their master had really done all this, and another confirmed that the monsters had attacked in waves but suddenly stopped. It soon became clear that the enemies were dying too quickly, as if an invisible force were destroying them. One participant worriedly asked where his brother had gone, while another desperately called for Master Shizuru. The boy explained that his brother had gone deeper into the forest and was likely behind what was happening. The others became concerned for Shizuru and decided to act immediately before he was put in danger. Suddenly, the group stopped. Something enormous appeared ahead. One of the fighters shouted for everyone to stay put. After checking each other, they thanked Master Shizuru with relief that it was his magic that had saved them from the monster. The knights swore to protect Lord Shizuru at any cost, fully aware that they would face a monster whose strength exceeded that of humans. They understood that even if the three of them united, victory would cost them everything. Garrett asked doubtfully why Lord Shizuru had joined them, and Raiden added hesitantly that he'd like to stay around a little longer. Just then, cheers and raised fists, ready for battle, were heard from behind. The three men watched in confusion as the boy created an electrical barrier, advising them to remain inside for safety. Afterward, he confidently declared that he would take charge and prepared to complete the mission alone. Despite their concern for him, the others complied and allowed him to proceed. Young Master Shizuru stepped forward, meeting the gaze of the enchained, enormous ogre. He loudly declared the start of a one-on-one duel, ignoring the distant voice assuring him that he would not succeed. The red-haired fighter parried the powerful blow and abruptly declared that he would not allow his enemy to pass. His opponent, stunned by the youth's fury and resilience, froze with a tense expression. The boy clenched his hand, complaining of pain, and was surprised by the strength of the weapon, while the two onlookers argued over whether the rescue was a lucky break or a show of force. The redhead smirked and declared that his wounds were just a warm-up, ordering the blonde not to interfere any further, promising to finish the fight. The blonde, however, countered that enough blood had already been spilled. Several warriors panicked and begged Hamura and Shizuru to stop fighting, insisting the moment was inopportune. Meanwhile, nearby, two monsters growled menacingly, preparing for battle. The red-haired man confidently declared that all the bloodshed was only the beginning and ordered the blonde to stay behind. But the blonde countered that he wanted to entrust the rest to his younger brother, believing he deserved a chance to prove himself. The others tried to stop them again, reminding them that personal disputes weren't the issue at hand, but the threat all around them. At that moment, a beastly roar erupted from the darkness, causing everyone to turn around. Two soldiers cautiously recognized the sound, usually heard only in the depths of the forest, and suggested an immediate retreat. But the young students, on the contrary, were eager to play with the mysterious creature. One of the orcs chuckled and suggested that they first find out who among those present was capable of defeating the monster nearby before deciding where to go next. The younger one shouted to his brother, pointing out a strange movement in the bushes, and the older one reacted irritably, again blaming Shizuru for what was happening. The boy admitted he was inferior to his brother in strength, but proudly declared himself faster than anyone. The chains holding the enraged creature creaked loudly beneath their feet. A heated argument ensued between them, each proving their superiority. One boasted of his speed, the other responded with confidence and victory, and their gazes flared with fury against the roaring battle. The young man was surprised to see a sword fly through the air from a great distance. He immediately recognized the weapon. It was his older brother's blade, which had lodged itself near the chained giant. Then he volunteered to fight a high-ranking mutated monster, and the other, clutching his head, realized that the very same hum they had heard earlier had come from this very creature. Everyone froze, listening to its roar. The group noticed a pack of wild wolves drawn by the scent of goblin blood. One suggested they split up, while the other cautiously moved off in the opposite direction, watching the beast's movements. The young master summoned a lightning bow, drew back its string, and unleashed a thunderous spear, followed by an axe of pure energy. The onlookers gasped as Shizuru himself arrived on the battlefield. The young man admitted he'd lost to the goblins last time and suggested not using fire in the forest. However, before he could finish speaking, a monster appeared behind him, and someone shouted at the master to run immediately. The young gentleman delightedly discovered another enemy, causing utter bewilderment among his accompanying warriors. They couldn't believe his childish joy, as if he'd found a new toy. Meanwhile, the young man noted that the monster had no desire to kill, it seemed to revel in the torment of the weak. One of the onlookers silently thought that the creature's overconfidence would be its undoing. The boy then confidently declared that he would use a special weapon against the enemy. The next moment, he demonstrated the force of his blow, and the powerful discharge caused everyone around him to recoil in amazement. Two fists clashed with a loud bang, and the fighters froze for a moment. Then the white-haired warrior charged forward, attacking the monster with determination and without a trace of hesitation. Two armored soldiers cried out in despair to their reckless master that he could not win with his childish strength. However, the monster, watching mockingly, heard the youth calmly reply, compared to him, they were mere shadows of their former warriors. Raiden delivered a powerful blow to the giant enemy, causing him to stagger, before confidently declaring that it was time to end the battle. The red-haired fighter joyfully announced that it was all over on their side and asked his brother how he was doing. The blonde grimly replied that the enemy had literally been cut in half, a sight that made his heart clench. The dark-haired boy asked incredulously if he had actually burned the monster to the ground. The fair-haired boy calmly confirmed that he had done just that. At this time, a carriage moved slowly along a forest road. A girl in the window gazed thoughtfully into the distance, and the man sitting next to her reflected on the extraordinary abilities of the Ferblaze children, whose skill surpassed their age. The young man noticed the girl staring into space and gently asked if she was okay. She looked detached, as if she hadn't heard the question. He remained silent for a while, not insisting, until she suddenly apologized sincerely and thanked him for his concern. Later, the young man happily greeted Lucina, who arrived at the estate in a horse-drawn carriage, and cheerfully asked how she was doing after her recent trip. The woman approached and apologized, asking to let Lucina rest today. The journey had left her exhausted. He reluctantly agreed, but felt a twinge of alarm. The girl's fatigue clearly had another cause. Working behind the counter, he was certain something had happened on Marquis Rufus's estate. This thought haunted him. Later, the young man asked if they had managed to find out what had happened to Lucina. In response, the girl said she had tried to contact a servant who worked in Lorelei's house. He thought about how harshly they treated her. The girl without a gift was called a lady without a blessing and wasn't even acknowledged as a granddaughter, which seemed cruel to a 7-year-old. Looking away seriously, he said that Lucina only evoked sympathy, and adults who behaved like this should have known better. They sat together in the gazebo. One noticed that the other looked happy today, and the girl, a little surprised, admitted that perhaps she really did feel happy. The girl quietly recalled her mother, Maria, a frail woman incapable of bearing children. A friend suggested visiting the Rufus family to learn more about her mother's past. Despite the danger, Maria decided to give birth to Lucina, but she paid for it with her life. Her lifeless figure remained on the rocking chair, while the baby slept peacefully next to her, unaware of the tragedy. The girl admitted with slight excitement that she was looking forward to meeting her grandparents, but her interlocutor only smiled softly, saying that he would be lonely without her during her absence. She blushed, looking away in confusion, while the young man, noticing her embarrassment, added with a grin that he was just joking. This made her awkwardly address him as Shizuru-sama, trying to maintain her seriousness. The girl sheepishly asked him not to tease her anymore, to which the guy apologized with a slight smile, silently acknowledging he'd spoken the truth. Meanwhile, the man standing next to her quietly wished she could have a real conversation with him. After a brief pause, the young man explained that after what had happened to his mother, he often imagined Lucina experiencing similar feelings. The maid stood nearby, listening attentively to every word and addressing him with respect. He noted that Lucina had lost her mother, been nicknamed the lady without a blessing, and had been deprived of the care of her elders, learning to suppress herself. He, on the other hand, spoke warmly of how his family and servants treated him well, and how he lived a full life despite the nickname Child of Miracles. The boy reflected on how lucky he had been in life, but at the same time, he felt powerless. He couldn't help Lucina. The maid standing nearby was silent, but her attentive gaze spoke of sympathy. Then the girl enthusiastically exclaimed that he simply needed to draw her into his life. He was surprised and curiously asked what she meant by his life. Lucina lowered her eyes, feeling confused when the young man extended his hand toward her. Deep down, she wondered if his bright, fortunate fate was drawing her into its current. Finally, she hesitantly asked if her idea seemed strange. After a brief moment of reflection, the young man perked up and enthusiastically agreed with her words. The guy thanked Marl with a smile for her support and, unable to contain himself, confessed his love, blushing and beaming with joy. The next morning, he greeted Lucina cheerfully when he met her outside the building. She responded quietly and thoughtfully, noting with mild surprise how close they were now standing. He said that they would not be having breakfast here today, and she, somewhat embarrassed, asked where they were going. The young man took her hand and led her down the corridor, explaining that today they would exit through the main entrance. The girl, not understanding what he meant, anxiously asked where he was taking her. At this time, the two maids noticed Raiden and Lumil heading towards the exit and exchanged smiling remarks, wondering if they were going to have breakfast together while enjoying the touching picture. However, other maids suddenly appeared before them, startling them both. The girl and boy realized they were too late, and then heard a call, Shizuru-sama's name called in surprise. He calmly replied that she would go with him today, then activated lightning-fast acceleration. The girl noted with confusion that it was he who was holding her hand, and not the other way around. The next moment, the guy suddenly picked her up, apologizing as she sheepishly asked to be put down. He merely reminded her that she had promised to do whatever he asked. He then easily vaulted over the fence, still holding her, and, smiling, asked if everything was okay. She nodded, stunned, her heart beating faster after the soft but confident landing.